Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Studios, and today we're having a look at Kerbal Space Program again. It's been about 2 years since I played Kerbal Space Program on the channel, but I decided to get back into it, and it's been really fun. I've been messing around trying to get some things back into my head about how to play the game, and I decided to give myself a bit of a challenge to get to orbit of Kerbin with only solid boosters, and also have a secondary rule of only being able to turn SAS on once I'd reached space. So you can see a couple of my first attempts in the background right now. It's playing in 4 times speed because reasons, and I was just seeing how easy it would be to get to orbit using SAS before and after and everything, but just to see how easy it would be to get there. When I say it's a beginner challenge, I don't mean someone who's absolutely brand new to the game and doesn't know how to get to orbit at all or anything like that, but someone who's still trying to get to grips with the game, hasn't done an interplanetary mission yet or something like that, and it's a nice sense of achievement when you've done it, and it's something I think that beginner players who've got to grips with the basic controls but aren't quite there yet would find nice and challenging, but also not too difficult to do. It took me, how long's this video? About an hour to get everything sorted. It would probably take some people less if you are slightly better than me, but I'm just trying to get used to the game again. I can barely rendezvous with other ships at this point, so that's about where I am as in terms of player skill. But here's an attempt. It didn't go very well, but I was just messing around with what types of techniques I can use and what parts I can use to get myself into orbit. So I have the biggest solid booster you can get on the bottom of the rocket, or at least the second biggest, and then on top of that I have the smallest, actually, I think. And it's only a double stage, but on that smaller rocket there are 4 of the tiny separatrons, which are actually made to pull your stages apart when they're separating if you have them next to each other, but I'm using them to give myself a little bit extra push once I'm actually in space, so I can establish a nice orbit. As you can see, I did end up getting really quite high, and in this particular try I did actually manage to make it to space, but I didn't quite have enough delta V to get myself into orbit. So then I had to start trying to figure out what else I could do with solid boosters to get myself into orbit, and there I am turning on SAS once I'd got to space, which is 70,000 meters, and I tried to get there. It was fairly close. I think if I'd had about half more, if you know what I mean, 1.5 times more thrust, I would have been able to get there in the last stage, but I'd now added a couple more separatrons. I didn't want to go too overboard, so I thought that 12 would be more than enough, and I wouldn't go more than that. But I did end up adding 2 more a bit later on to try and get a slightly better gravity turn at the start, because setting myself the rule of not being able to use SAS beforehand meant that I couldn't pull the craft over, and I wouldn't touch the keyboard except for the staging beforehand. So I couldn't pull myself over into a gravity curve unless I used some other form of propulsion, which ended up being the extra 2 separatrons, which I used to kind of push the craft off to an angle rather than trying to use some weird way of doing it. It was an interesting method, to say the least, but it did actually work pretty well after a couple tries of getting the thing lined up right and putting them on the right way around, so I'd follow the curvature of not the curvature of the Earth, the rotation of Kerbin, and they worked pretty well once I'd actually started using them earlier on, but at first I wasn't. I was using them quite far up, so I wasn't getting enough of a turn. So I basically ended up having to use them basically once I'd left the tower almost immediately. So that's one way of doing it, and I think I did pretty well. I left the thrust at 100% and then pulled the fuel down to, I think, 2.4 on the solid boosters of solid fuel on those two Separatrons, because if I pushed them all the way, I would probably have ended up flipping over completely. I started really small and I slowly worked my way up until I had loads of thrust to actually push me over to about, I'd say, a 30-degree angle. Not quite 45, because I could have done 45, but I didn't have enough thrust then to get into the right orbit, so that's how that worked. So here are the last few attempts of me trying to just add some extra boosters to the rocket so I would have a nice high apoapsis and be able to circularize my orbit into a nice, fairly circular path. But it didn't look perfect in the end, but it was fine. These 4 boosters were a bit too much power. They kind of blew the thing up as it went up, and it was a bit too much for the little payload to handle. But it did get me really, really high, so I wanted to see how well it would work. But I blew off my solar panel, so that wasn't really a good way of doing it. However, if I had left it like that, I probably would have been able to leave that orbit, but I wasn't very happy with it, so I decided to give it one more try and just remove 2 of the boosters to see if that would help, because that would give me enough of a change to actually be able to get a nice and decent orbit. Staging was wrong, as it always is at least once in a Kerbal session, but getting that little Sepratron working was nice, and I had a fairly decent angle, and then it blew up because my boosters were too high. But the final attempt is right here. Let's have a look and see how I did. Making sure SAS is off, and just rotating immediately to about 30 degrees, and then it pulls itself back to about 15, and then I just waited until the 2 outer boosters were empty, and then separated them and waited for the main booster to run out as well. Obviously, being solid boosters, there's no thrust control, so I wouldn't have been able to change the thrust of the boosters because they stay at the same speed once you've started them. I could have also changed the amount of fuel in them, but I decided to leave everything at 100% except for the Separatrons, because those are a little bit finicky. But here we go for the final launch. I thought the previous one was, but it obviously was not. But let's have a look and see. Making sure SAS is off again, and heading up, we have the 2 boosters, then we push ourselves over and attempt to get a nice angle. It worked pretty well. It wasn't quite at the at a perfect angle. It pulled us off a little bit to the right, but that's fine. And then I just had to wait for the outer boosters to empty like before, but they're a bit lower this time, so they didn't blow up the whole craft. Then I just had to wait for the center booster to run out as well, checking my apoapsis, which was already gaining and getting to a pretty high altitude. It did start overheating, but luckily I ran out of fuel just in time for them to not explode. Then I ejected the bottom stage, and we slowed down just in time for everything to cool down again. Obviously, this is lowering my apoapsis because I'm still in the atmosphere and spinning around like crazy, but we were going fast enough that it didn't actually make too much of a difference. Then I just sped up time to get myself to the apoapsis and see if I could circularize the orbit. Obviously, it's not very easy to get a perfectly circular orbit because they are solid boosters, like I said, so you can't change the amount of thrust once they're started. But now that we're in space, I could activate SAS, turn myself into prograde, and just fire off those separatrons, the first stage of them at least, and start circularizing. So the first set didn't do too much, but they did help. In fact, I could probably do without them now, with the exception of the ones that pull the craft over at the start. But the final booster did manage to get us all the way into a pretty elliptical orbit, actually. But I'd say that that's pretty good and would be indicative of a not so successful liquid fuel launch, and I'm pretty happy with that because it is still in orbit, whether it's elliptical or not, and I'm pretty happy with it. I could extend my solar panels because they didn't explode that time, and this little satellite would stay up there forever. So there we have it. Thank you everyone for watching. It has been an interesting episode, just to get myself back into Kerbal Space Program. And I hope everyone's happy with the content I've been able to make. I think this is my 6th or 7th video that I've posted weekly. As in, I haven't missed an upload for 7 months. So, 7 weeks, sorry. And next week will be the 8th, and I'm trying to not miss an upload. And even if I do, I think I have a couple spare videos that I can throw in there just in case. There'll be more VR content coming soon, and there'll be more Space Engineers content coming out once that big economy update becomes available for everyone. So I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you are interested in model rocketry, I have been messing around with some interesting sugar rockets that I'm showing you some clips of right now. So if you're interested in that, I'll probably be posting some videos of some later tests once we've perfected our designs. Right now they're not going very far or very fast, with the exception of this one. So yeah, it goes pretty fast, and there we have it. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Also, don't forget to have a look at our Discord server, and there's been some pretty cool stuff happening over there. I keep forgetting to say that, but thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.